So welcome to week 3 of Political Science 1101, Introduction to American Politics. This is Dr. Bitzer again, and this week we're going to be covering two subjects. One is a kind of continuation of last week's discussion on the Constitution, but specifically we're going to be focusing on chapters 4 and 5 related to civil liberties and civil rights. And then we'll move into a section that I call political behavior, and we'll start off by talking about public opinion. So just as a recap, so far in my approach to thinking about American politics as a game of politics, remember it's a game about political power. Power leads to politics, which is the expression or the means of that political power. Politics then leads to public policy, which are government decisions to act or to not to act. Once government decides to act or chooses not to act, that creates favoritism or bias to one group over another, and that bias leads us back to power. And so over the past 2 weeks, what I hope you've been able to take away from the introduction so far to American politics is that we've talked about the ideas behind the game of politics. What is government? What is politics? In America, how do we see our governmental structure? Through a republic, through a democracy. It's actually a democratic republic, a combination of the two. How do we, the people, deal with political power? We enumerate it, we express it, we write it down, but we've also got implied powers, powers that are unwritten, but are part of the written power that government has. And then we've also talked about different American political values. I hope you've got a pretty good foundation of what those are. Things like the rule of law over the rule of men. People should participate in their government, be civically engaged. There are a lot of political values that America has that helps to shape the way that we play the game and the way that the game is played. Another core idea that we talked about is federalism. And if you think about governing power, this is the division of governing power vertically between our national, our states, and our local governments. So that's one way that you can take power and divide it. You can concentrate power or you can divide it. We choose to divide it vertically. We also choose to divide it horizontally through the U.S. Constitution. And a good way to think, again, about the U.S. Constitution is that it's the rules of the game. Here, we, the people, give some power over to the government. Here's how we set up the government. Here's what the government can and cannot do. And again, I always go back to this notion of if federalism is the division of vertical power, what we are doing with the rules of the game is dividing power horizontally among Congress, the legislature, among the president, the executive branch, among the courts, the judiciary. And really what those three institutions, what those three branches of government are doing is actually sharing power. When we get into talking about Congress, the president, the courts, you're going to notice a lot of overlap between how the institutions operate and how they have to share power when they're trying to exercise governmental power. So that's kind of a recap of where we are so far. So this week, what we're going to be doing is talking about, again, civil liberties and rights, kind of a continuation of this discussion of the Constitution and what it does to governmental power, and then talk about public opinion. And as I noted earlier, this is part of the broader aspect of what we in political science call political behavior. And we're going to get into a lot more details about political behavior, but one aspect is public opinion. And that in a summary, in a kind of nutshell, the way that I think about public opinion is that it connects we, the people, to the government. Public opinion can shape government actions, can influence what the government chooses to do, along with other areas. And I'll give you a broad overview of those areas in just a minute. So, as to civil liberties and civil rights, again, kind of in the chapters, you're going to be looking at specifically the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and then certain select amendments in the Constitution as well, primarily the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, along with the 19th Amendment. And what that gives us are what we in political science call substantive versus procedural rights and liberties. Now, let me define for you what a substantive versus a procedural right or fundamental freedom is. A substantive fundamental freedom or a substantive right or liberty is what the government can, but more importantly, cannot do. This is where we tell the government, you cannot do certain things. When it comes to the procedural rights and liberties that we have, those are considered to be the fundamental freedoms that shape how government interacts or engages with its citizens. How will government treat its citizens, as opposed to a substantive right, which is government can or cannot do something. Now, when it comes to these Bill of Rights, oftentimes we define the first 10 amendments as civil liberties. And as probably everybody has known or has a general context of, oftentimes we associate this with the First Amendment. And if you'll read the Bill of Rights in the textbook, or you can find them online, you'll notice that in the First Amendment, it says very explicitly, Congress shall make no law. This is a substantive approach. Congress, you can't do something. That is oftentimes how we define civil liberties. These are protections from government action. The way that I think about civil liberties, the protection from government action on fundamental freedoms. Now, when it comes to the idea of civil rights, oftentimes people have a kind of idea, well, these are two of the same things, right? Civil liberties and civil rights. If civil liberties is protection from government action, civil rights is the idea that government will protect fundamental freedoms. And in particularly in the United States, this is the national government protecting fundamental freedoms. When you read the 14th Amendment, you'll find embedded in there the statement, no state shall do a series of things. This is very similar to civil liberties. Notice, Congress shall make no law, no state shall in civil rights. But here, the idea is that the national government will protect fundamental freedoms against state government actions. And so, in general, what you can think about with civil liberties and civil rights is the idea of protection, but protection in two distinct ways. The first, with civil liberties, is protection from the government for fundamental freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. But civil rights is the idea of protection by the government for fundamental freedoms, such as the right to vote for both persons of color, African Americans, and women. So you can think about this general idea, civil liberties and rights, in two distinct ways, but they're always surrounded around the idea of protection, either from the government or by the government. Now, in the civil liberties and civil rights, we have both enumerated rights and liberties, those that are written down, first 8 amendments to the Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights. But then we also have implied rights. Just as we talked about with the Constitution, with enumerated powers and implied powers, there are also enumerated rights and implied rights. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. The fundamental question oftentimes surrounding civil liberties and civil rights is, are there absolute rights? Do you have an absolute right to freedom of speech? Do you have an absolute right to bear arms? Do you have, various fundamental freedoms? Can you take it to the extremes? And that's always the controversy in civil liberties and civil rights in American politics. How far do these freedoms stretch? So some questions to consider about civil liberties and civil rights as you're reading the textbook and thinking about these ideas. Again, in Blackboard, you'll see a much more detailed set of questions. I've just collapsed a lot of them into this, but I wanted to hit some highlights. Specifically, how do civil liberties and rights protect citizens against both the federal and state government actions? You've got an idea about the general principles of the national government, of state governments. How do civil liberties and rights protect citizens? The different rights and liberties in the Bill of Rights. You'll kind of go through each of them and see different fundamental areas and liberties that are protected in the Bill of Rights. Are there implied rights, such as the right to privacy? It's not found anywhere, but it's there per the court's decisions. What are the challenges regarding discrimination against different groups of Americans? Against African Americans, against women, against members of the gay community, against indigenous people, Native Americans, Hispanic, Latino Americans. And how have the courts dealt with these civil rights for different groups of Americans? These are all questions that I want you to be thinking about in the back of your mind as you're taking notes and you're reading the text. Now, in terms of political behavior and public opinion, here's how I kind of see what is political behavior and how it fits into the game of politics. And of course, we start off with we the people, the citizens, and the way that I think about political behavior is that there are things like public opinion, interest groups, campaigns and elections, political parties, Republicans, Democrats, the media. When it comes to citizens and these different groups, these different aspects of political behavior, all of them are shaped and interacted by citizens, but also have, you'll notice, a reverse effect of public opinion on citizens, interest groups on citizens, political parties on citizens, the media on citizens. These two groups interact with each other. And once you have that interaction going on, you then see the connection to the government, the institutions, the Congress, the president, the courts, the bureaucracy. So political behavior, those groups kind of in the middle, from public opinion down to the media, help citizens interact with the government, but are also impacting how citizens interact with the government. And once the government is there, they then create public policies. Those are government decisions, government actions or inactions. And then guess what? Those public policies go back and impact citizens. So this is what we call oftentimes a systems approach. And the way that I think about political behavior is that they are linkage mechanisms. They link citizens to the government. The government creates public policies. Those public policies impact citizens. So that's kind of a big picture way of thinking about what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of sections of the class. Some questions to consider about public opinion. What is public opinion? We oftentimes hear about it, but what is it? And in particularly, what is political socialization? And more importantly, what political socialization is the study of what influences citizens in learning about politics. This course is helping you to understand and to learn about politics. It is part of political socialization. That is an important role in American politics. There are other factors that might influence your learning about politics as well. How do political beliefs and ideology shape public opinion? In my mind, what an ideology is simply a way to look at how the world should work. There are some of us who are conservatives. There are some of us who are liberals. There's a lot of us who are moderates, kind of in the middle. How does that view of the world shape public opinion? How can you measure public opinion? Oftentimes through polls. But what are some also the challenges to measuring public opinion? And then a couple more questions. What is public opinion among different groups of Americans? Is there differences in public opinion among gender, among race, among partisanship? All of those ideas will be explored. And then what factors change public opinion? Public opinion doesn't necessarily have to be stable. It can change over time. And then finally, what impacts does public opinion have on our politics and on our government? So by the end of this week, in terms of these two lessons, you should have an understanding about the importance of civil liberties and civil rights in American politics. I teach courses on constitutional law that really gets into depth of these two areas, civil liberties and civil rights, if you're interested in taking a course on that in the future. How do you understand the challenges and the approaches to civil liberties and civil rights, particularly over the past, let's say, 60, 70 years in terms of those two topics? How does public opinion shape? And then how is it shaped by American politics? And then how is public opinion measured in the issues surrounding public opinion? And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. Let me know. Particularly use the Dr. Bitzer I Need Help section in Blackboard. Reach out to me via email or come to an office hours, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Good luck learning about civil liberties, civil rights, and public opinion this week. We'll see you soon.